Welcome to RajaReads. I'm Masood Raja, and on this channel I introduce you to books from different parts of the world. Today I'll be introducing you to Sembene Ousmane's God's Bits of Wood. So God's Bits of Wood first appeared in French in 1960. Now Sembene Ousmane is a Senegalese author, and he's also a very well-known film producer and film director. This novel is sort of a historical novel because it tells the story of the 1937 Senegal Dakar Railway Strike. And it's a realistic novel, and it's not necessarily a character-driven novel, but rather a plot-driven novel. By that, what I mean is that it relies mostly on the historical event itself of the strike to tell the story, even though there are quite a few main characters, including Ibrahim Bakayoko, who is the leader of the strike. But the story is not told from his perspective or doesn't privilege his perspective. So the basic narrative is built around the 1937 railway workers' strike. These were native workers of Senegalese railway, and they were striking to get certain benefits that were given to the European workers, but not to the daily workers or temporary workers of the railway line. Now Ibrahim Bakayoko is a train engineer or a driver, and he is the leader in popular sense of the movement. Now I have also published on this, and there is a longer video available on my other channel. But the way I read the novel is that besides telling us as to how the communities come together, how the urban and rural communities in colonized Senegal come together to stand against the French, and how do they regulate the strike, the novel also teaches us as to what would it take for workers in any given community to succeed against the power of those who have more resources than them and more power than them. And the thing that I learned from the novel is that for any social or political movement to succeed against a powerful constituency, what they would need is a sort of solidarity that works across all divides. Children, women, rural communities, people across ethnicities and races need to come together and work in a way that no one out of them breaks away or is coerced into breaking the strike. And if you think about it, even in modern societies, wherever the workers have the right to strike, the strike immediately faces these challenges because those who own the modes of production can bring in the strike breakers. They can hire cheaper labor from elsewhere. So increasingly labor as a collectivity keeps losing their clout. The novel, in one sense, then also teaches us how does the community come together? How do they deal with the strike breakers? Through public shaming. They even hold a trial for one of them who had broken the strike and gone to work. But by and large, what you learn through this is, of course, parts of Senegalese culture, the family life, the love life of young people, but also the march to Dakar by women, because women's march is a prominent part of the novel, and they become very active participants of the strike. They are not on the fringes of it. So overall, I won't even attempt to pronounce the French title. The God's Bits of Wood is a saying in Senegal by which people usually mean that, who are we? We are just insignificant beings created by God, right? And I think the ironic part of it is that when these insignificant beings come together for a cause, they ultimately can change things. Now, the way the novel is set up is we are first in one community We find out what is the impact of strike on them. What do the colonizers do, like from cutting off water to cutting off access to any other thing that women might need, because they are trying to pressure the households so that that has an impact on the workers. But that doesn't work because all the community women come together, they cook collectively, they share their resources. So everything that the French unleash against the community has a response to that through collective action and through social cohesion. Then when people march to the city, they pass through rural communities who are not at all connected to the strike, but the rural villages and communities come out, give them food, give them comfort, and actively participate in their struggle. So what it tells us is that in a given colonial situation, the struggles cannot be isolated. It cannot be one constituency fighting on their own, but rather building lateral solidarities with others. So the way I teach the novel, of course, I teach the narrative. I give a little background of the Dakar strike. But the way I teach it, and I've published on it too, is I also teach it as a great narrative, fictionalized account of a historical event that can also teach us the new modes of resisting the global imperatives, the capitalistic imperatives. And one thing that is absolutely crucial in that is to develop lateral solidarities. Now, one example that I use in my classes is a few years ago, I think 10 years ago, I think the Chicago bus union drivers were trying to negotiate their contract, and of course the owners were not interested in doing so. So they then reached out to their London counterpart, who belonged to the same company, and asked them, would you strike in solidarity with us? And just the threat by the London Union to strike in solidarity brought the managers and the company to the negotiation table. So the most important lesson then what we learn is that for any kind of resistance against capitalism, against large corporations, the individual idealized heroic resistance probably is not going to work, because an individual is very easy to isolate and put aside. But a collective resistance, collective in a sense that there is no central hierarchy, but there is a central mission. And everyone comes together in their own capacity to make that mission successful. And if any community can achieve that kind of across communal solidarity or sympathy or even neutrality, so that no one actively is working against their interests, then the chances of success are higher. So in that sense, I teach this novel as a novel that can teach us as to how to organize social and political activism for change, for justice, and that the main ingredient of it would always be how resilient the community is, how do they support each other, but most importantly, can they develop lateral solidarities with other communities who might come together in order for things to change. And I think the novel does a brilliant job of teaching us that. Now, if you're a researcher, there are quite a lot of issues that you can research about and publish about. You could actually compare the novelistic representation with the actual strike, what happened, how does Ousmane Sembene represent it. You could also write about the French colonialism in Senegal and what happens in the post-colony. All of these things could form part of a wonderful research project or projects. But overall, if you want to read a good realistic novel which tells the story of Dakar, Senegal, railway strike, through some really good characters but also a wonderful plot, I highly recommend this book. Thank you so much for joining me. As always, I hope you're staying safe. I'll now be back with some other book to talk about. Until then, stay safe, take care, and as always, peace and love.